All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Red Emma's. It's almost open in its new and fourth location. How many people are here for the first time? All right, so if you don't know our deal, we're a worker cooperative. That means everybody who you see working here is either an equal owner of the business or on their way to becoming an equal owner of the business. It means that we're grounded in workplace democracy, and we're grounded in creating space that we can use for community like this. This building is ours. We bought it. We're renovating it. We're renovating the building next door. It's going to be a 2-story bookstore that will open a little later in the year. We're going to put the whole thing inside a community land trust so it stays permanently affordable forever. So we're really, really excited to be here. We're really excited to be reopening. Honestly, after like a lot of quarantine and isolation, we're just really excited to see so many people coming out to talk about books. So thank you. We have a lot of great stuff coming up, even before we get the cafe fully open, which should be really soon. But I encourage you to check out our website. One event you should know about this Saturday at 1 o'clock, we've got Eric Stanley coming to talk about their book, Atmospheres of Violence. It's a kind of book about how sort of liberal inclusion actually masks and like propagates forms of violence. They'll be in conversation with Jamie Grace, local trans activist. So it's going to be a really, really good event. It's on a weird time. It's Saturday at 1 p.m. So go to the farmer's market and then swing by. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Baynard Woods, who's going to be reading from his new book, Inheritance, an Autobiography of Whiteness. It's really interesting to me to read this book. I read it like basically in one sitting last night. It's a page turner, so please don't leave here without buying the book because it is not just full of great ideas and important points, but it's actually like really, really good to read. And I want to say also it's a fascinating look at somebody kind of unpacking their own trajectory through this, confusing, at times liberatory, at times scary historical moment, coming to terms with their own identity as a white person. It was interesting to me reading it because, like many of you probably, I first ran into Baynard through his writings at the City Paper, where, honestly, I wasn't sure what to make of the people at the City Paper at first, right? All weeklies could be kind of weird, right? They could have oh, here's a cool show, and here's a totally retrograde political opinion dressed up as ironic snark. And, I was like, where does this Baynard guy fit in on here, right? Okay, he wrote a book about a voodoo sheriff, that's not helpful. But over the years, I started to come to realize that Baynard was awesome. Baynard was doing incredible work. We were lucky enough to host an event, I think during the height of the first months of the pandemic for I Got a Monster, an incredible book written with Brendan Soderbergh on the gun case task force. And reading this book was actually really interesting because it gave me the other side of it. It gave me actually what was going on with Baynard and how Baynard was changing and adapting and developing a consciousness that was, rising to kind of meet the historical moment. And I say all that, but I also don't want to give you the impression that this is a book about development of a person, right? Or realization of a person. Because ultimately it's a kind of a bummer of a book. Because it's a book that takes seriously the fact that there are no good white people. Baynard doesn't, announce his good white personness at the end of the book. He does a lot, he comes to terms with a lot, he grows, he develops, he deals with things. But ultimately, the thing he deals with is the fact that, there is really nothing that can be pulled from the wreckage of the historical project of whiteness. There is no identity that can be salvaged, right? That there's no core that you can sort of hold on to and purify from all of the just violence that identity has been constructed with at a systemic level. And that is a different way of telling a personal narrative, and it's one that I found incredibly honest and incredibly valuable. And I'm thrilled to have Baynard here to talk about it. I'm thrilled to have Eze Jackson here to respond to it. I think we're going to have some music with the reading to kick things off. But please join me in giving a warm welcome to Baynard Woods.
Start with a mic drop. I'm so happy to be here. Like John said, Emma's hosted me and Brandon virtually for I Got a Monster and then for the paperback launch. But like that whole time we were thinking about community and what it means to write a book, which is writing a book. I'm the opposite of the people who say they hate writing but love to have written. I love writing, but this part of it, of having a book come out, is just horrible, except for moments like this. When you're together with people that you love, people who care about books, want to connect with books, and people in our city, which is really has taught me more than anything else about the stuff in this book about whiteness. And like John said, it's not, the thing I loved the most about I Got a Monster, I think, was that people who had read me and Brandon before that were surprised when they read the book. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And so this book, I hope, is also surprising to the people even that read Monster, or that the one negative review so far, I think they were expecting, a corporate sort of training manual like White Fragility, which certainly has its use, but is this is full of sex and drugs and cigarettes and stuff too. And it's not pretending, like John was saying about my own trajectory, it's not pretending that I'm perfect in any way, that I've been perfect in any way, or that I have the answers. And I think that's what we have to do to move forward is D. Watkins and I were on the same press, and so we were trading these books back and forth, and his deals with masculinity and mine deals with whiteness. And in both cases, it's that the people who want to be better, too many of us then pretend we're already there. And so the young people don't ever get there except just by trying to emulate, but they don't know all of the centuries worth of stuff that has been filling their minds. And so I'm going to read for just about 7 minutes, for just a short, this is what, from my friend Aaron back there, I learned as a setup on the radio, letting you know what to expect. So you'll get about 7 minutes, because I want to give you a chance to get a sense of the prose. And, what's a reading about whiteness without an electric guitar? So, figured I'd bring an electric guitar. This is Michael Shank. He's a member of my band, the Baynard Woods. And a great guitar player, and so it's fun to be able to do things like that to make it a little more entertaining for you, because I realize it's a hard book to excerpt also, because it always ends with me being an asshole at every point. And so how do you end and not just leave with hey, yeah, so I'm terrible, or with oh, I'm so good, and either one of those is not the place you necessarily, and you don't want to re-traumatize anyone, and there's all sorts of things. So I'm going to read a little bit, some various sections. Much of the emotional heft of the book comes in the relationship between me and my dad, and he was dying as I was writing it, and he's a Trump supporter and all of these things. It was very intense relation there, and I'm not going to read from that, but a lifelong friend. The book starts with me and him going skateboarding at the state capitol in South Carolina as we go downtown with my dad. And we both make complete changes in our trajectories in utterly different directions where we are now through the course of the book. So, fair warning, I'm giving away one plot line, but still buy it, because there's a bunch of other plot lines and a bunch of other things. And there is some theoretical stuff, and I'm going to have a little of that come up. But it really is a book about it's not enough to say, like John said, like this whole project of whiteness is filled with such a vast amount of violence that we as white people have never stopped to even think about. We're doing better with like plantation sites to reckon with what happened to the people that were enslaved there, but what we haven't reckoned with is that our ancestors were the ones who did that, and what it was like for them growing up in luxury with a concentration camp around them, and how they passed that on to their children and their children and their children who passed it on to us. And so that's what I'm was really trying to look at, because the problem is, so many of the people that we love, if we're white people, that we grew up with our families, inherited this too, and they're problems, and they're problematic, and we're problems, and we're problematic, and so you can't just throw the people over. And so for the sake of the white people that we love, we have to figure out how to abolish whiteness itself. And so, this is about the loss of a relationship with a longtime friend. It starts as like 1988 or something like that. 85. As the afternoon wore on, and Chuck and I exhausted the university spots, we found ourselves there once again, the historic Capitol building. I skated by the hulking stone edifice and looked up to see the bronze stars that marked where Yankee cannonballs had bombarded the dome roof. And I noted the statue of George Washington standing in front of the colossal stairs, holding a broken cane, which Mom had told me had been smashed by Yankees who hated freedom so much they'd stoned the statue of the father of our country. Sherman's men were condemned to burn the city, she said of the Union attack on the birthplace of secession, but then they had to go and attack the statue of George Washington. I bumped an ollie, sending my board up into the air with my feet still on it, and came down on an acorn. My wheels stopped. I flew forward down onto the hot concrete. My palms burned. Twigs and pine straw stuck to my sweaty chest and face. I heard Chuck say something and looked up to see his heel level with my face, pushing away as his wheels whirred across the concrete. I turned and saw cops running for me in gray uniforms. I climbed up from the pavement, and threw down my board so it was rolling, and jumped on it. As far as we knew, these cops had jurisdiction only in the State House grounds. So I surmised, once I made it down those steps and onto the sidewalk, I should be safe. One of the cops got close for a second, his holster bouncing against his leg as he tried to run and yell at the same time. But soon enough, he stopped, bent over, and coughing. I jumped down the steps as the rebel flag flapped over my head. "Fuck you, man! I'm having fun!" Chuck cried from ahead of me across the street. "Fascist pigs!" I yelled as I rode away. "Stupid cops," I said, swallowing a Whopper at the Burger King after the chase. "They're just like the Yankees who attacked the city. They're just trying to take our fucking freedom." "What?" Chuck said. "I mean, all we're doing is expressing ourselves, being free, having fun. And then they come running and tell us what we can't do," I said. "They don't even have the right to fly a rebel flag. We're the rebels, and they chase us away." "I don't think that's why the Union Army came down here, dude," said Chuck. When I was growing up, it was clear to me that everyone in Columbia walked around with this tragic sense that we lived in a conquered city, a city that had been burned. All the white people, at least, the ones who weren't Yankee transplants. We were all simultaneously sad, angry, and aggrieved, and it all felt justified. Even for a man like Dad, who believed in the system, or the American dream, more than anything. There was a sense that something was irrevocably lost, something in the universe deeply askew. In my house, both Christ and the South would rise again. Now it's about a decade or so later. We're watching the LA Uprising in '92. I really hope they don't call in the army on acid. I really hope they don't call in the army to start shooting people, like referring to the Los Angeles Uprising and protest of Rodney King's beating as he dropped a cigarette butt into the mouth of his beer can and left it on the porch. Yeah, I said following him inside. Just as I closed the door, I heard something outside. I immediately ran to the window, fearing the police were about to raid us. We were all increasingly paranoid. This moment felt like a glimpse of the truth, the rage that the era of Reagan and Bush had wrought. I regularly spent hours high on acid or speed, imagining CIA agents were on my roof, ready to bust in and either arrest or assassinate me. Watching footage of the cops beating King on TV, cops turning guns on residents, made it even worse. I was sure I was being persecuted, and so I naively felt that I could identify the black people in Los Angeles who refused to take it anymore and rose up. I thought we were all victims of a late empire police state. I thought that I understood them and they understood me. It was an illusion of alliance. It offered some validations to my romanticized sense of rebellion. There's an infinite gap between my self-conception and my material reality. I saw myself as a radical revolutionary poet who was dangerous enough to surveil. In fact, I was a cliche, a 19-year-old white boy getting too high in a house his grandfather owned. Obviously, my connection to the black protesters was some sort of wannabe revolutionary white fantasy. Whiteness is choosing to think we're something we're not, while enjoying the very real privileges of the reality we deny. We think we're rebels when we're burghers. We consider ourselves radical when we're revanchists. We insist on our gentility at the very moment we engage in torture. We consider ourselves white when we're splotchy shades of pink. We think we are universal, irreducible individuals, and we are white people exhibiting a youthful character, a group characteristic. Now another 15 so years later in 2017, and Chuck had been living in West Virginia in a holler in the hills all this time, whereas solely white around, and there's a scene, I lost the bookmark, but it's also getting long, so I'll skip it, where his neighbors are burying assault rifles in PVC pipes in the hills. And he tries to convince one of his neighbors not to, that he shouldn't be racist because they were getting arrested for growing weed, and he shows him the Peter Tosh legalized it album cover, and the neighbor fantasizes about killing Tosh and stealing his weed. And that's the intervening part. And now Brandon and I, who has the misfortune of being in the book, are coming from Charlottesville, where we had been covering the racist rally, and it's right after the car crash. On our way home. Waiting for my coffee, the crash still swirling in my mind on replay, I looked at Twitter to see that my old friend Chuck, the kid I used to skateboard with, the guy who lived with me, Blake, and then on the farm in West Virginia, was tweeting about how Antifa was responsible for the death of Heather Hare that afternoon in Charlottesville. I tweeted him that he was wrong, that I had been there, that he was defending Nazis who were intent on causing harm to my black neighbors and friends. The fascists had killed Heather Hare and could have just as well killed me or anyone else in the march that day. We've been arguing on Twitter ever since Trump announced his run. Chuck tweeted obsessively about Pizzagate. He endlessly shared stories about anti-fascists instigating violence. One day, shortly before Charlottesville, he tweeted, "Conservatism is the new counterculture," parroting an InfoWars acolyte. And it struck me how most of the counterculture that I'd experienced now seemed conservative. All of my rebellion as a skater, a punk, deadhead, pothead, amounted to a demand for more freedom for a white dude, mainly me, to be an irresponsible dick. Chuck and I used to skateboard and we got chased by security guards. We'd turn back and yell, "Fuck you, man, I'm having fun," as we rode away, and his online shitposting for Trump partook of that same aesthetic. "Fuck you, man, I'm having fun" is the ultimate form of the white man's protest. It isn't just "don't tread on me," but "I can tread on you if I want to." Chuck had not changed. It was I. When we had become blood brothers 2 decades earlier, we were camping at Stone Mountain, a giant monument to the lost cause, drinking Rebel Yell whiskey. It now seemed preposterous to me, unimaginable. I wanted to blow those monuments up, and Chuck wanted to save them. Now, I'd begun to see that the only rebellion that whiteness cannot forgive is working to end the oppression of black people, rebellion that seeks to limit the power of whiteness. That was the only rebellion worth its name. And by that token, the anti-fascists in Charlottesville, along with the protesters from the Baltimore Uprising, were among the only white rebels I'd ever seen. "You've called me a Nazi for the last time," Chuck DM'd me. "Goodbye." "You ready?" Brandon asked, walking up to me and shaking me from my screen. "Yeah, let's go," I said as I took my coffee from the counter. I cranked up Neil Young's "Tonight's the Night," and we drove for a long time back towards Baltimore in relative silence. I recalled a message Chuck had sent me on Twitter as I watched the monuments coming down 2 days later. "I'm dead serious about the Civil War thing," he wrote. "A lot of people are. I've been prepping, babe. If things do break down in this country, you're gonna want to be with your tribe, man. Get out of the city and come here, bro. I'm not trying to preach doom, but, well, I've seen things. I can feel them happening. It's been this way for many years now." 2 years earlier, Dylan Roof had seemed to embody everything I'd repressed about my own whiteness. Since then, the monster had multiplied to a swarm of furies come out of hiding. The white subconscious had been pried open, and the horrors in our hearts were emerging in a fearsome storm. All right, let's give it up for Michael Shea. And now for another person you may know as a musician, but is going to be here in a completely different capacity. My good friend, writer, Epic Fam founder, rapper, I just learned, amazing singer as well in recent weeks. And so welcome up Eze Jackson. Man, thank you so much for coming. This is like, wow.
Yeah, this is amazing. Y'all give it up for yourselves. This is a great crowd. I want to thank you first, man, because when you first told me about this book, you're like, I'm writing a book about whiteness, and I was like, okay.
I mean, that's an appropriate response.
Like, that's what you want to do, baby? Okay, I guess that's what you can do. But it was actually like getting ready for this talk that really pushed me to sit and read the book, and I think it's really necessary. I just want to say this in the beginning that I think it's necessary that people take this bold of an approach at whiteness and that the really like severity of it. But I think my first question for you is, who is your target audience? Like, if you could say, I hope that every person blank or every blank person who reads this book, who would that be?
That's a great question, and I love it because it's what I thought about the most when I was writing it, and it was really written for like the young kid who became Dylan Roof, the young kid who became Peyton Gendron, the young kid who is like growing up in a white community and is confused about what they hear or know or understand or have people tell them about race, and then they look it up and all they see are either like academic things, which are great, and I'm there's so many people so much smarter about this than me, so I'm not dissing that, but it's not going to help a 16-year-old kid. And the same with like HR training manuals, and so all they find is the racists. That's what happened. There's a scene in the book where that happens with a friend of mine in the 80s, and he mails off for a national advancement for the Association of White People pamphlet from David Duke. And now all they have to do is a Google search, and like a couple wrong searches, and you got a tiki torch out there. And so it's all those people that had the tiki torches to the people, like, because it's confusion that brings people there, and it's weakness, and it's a lack of meaning in our neoliberal sort of system. It doesn't provide a lot of meaning for people beyond like be a consumer, and so especially with people who don't have the capitalist ability to be consumers want to find another identity, and they'll reach towards whiteness if that's what they find, and all they find is toxic shit. And so I thought about the stuff I liked to read, and that's why there's all the like drinking and stuff like that, and that was like the stuff that I also looked for as a kid that would make me trust the person that I was writing. Not that it's a children's book, but there will be the children's edition coming soon.
No, I love that, because there, I'm going to read a part out of here that you might not have meant to write it comically, but I found it hilarious. And it is, Baynard is with his brother and his cousin, and they skateboard through a black neighborhood for the first time. Hey, let me see that board. One kid, a little older than me, said, walking quickly up beside me. He had a crisp white t-shirt and just a little bit of mustache growing above his lip. Nah, I said quietly. I looked around and saw that people were looking at us. A couple of other boys were walking our way. I threw my board down onto the sticky slope pavement and jumped on it. My brother and cousin did the same. Come on, give it here, the first guy said. I used my back foot to push my board as hard as I could. Come on, give it to me, he said, swiping lazily at my cousin as we pushed faster. You better run, he yelled, half-heartedly coming after us, shoes slapping the pavement behind me. As we roared ahead of him on our skateboards, the apartment buildings and brown faces a blur in our rattling polyurethane speed. A green translucent glimmer soared past my head. A plastic bottle thudded and bounced and skittered across the asphalt beside me. Then there was a rock. Fuck you, white boys, an older woman sitting on the steps near the exit of the parking lot yelled at us as the Michael Jackson song Billie Jean came from the radio on her stoop. And this part was funny to me because, I think that growing up black in America, especially in Baltimore, you tend to find humor in the dark parts, right? But I can remember being young and, you know, as recent as the 90s, you know, not being warned not to go through Hamden, being warned not to go through Highlandtown. And so when you talk about your target audience being these young kids, when you listen to these Proud Boys, and you know, a lot of times they have these little experiences, you know, where black people scare them, and then from there they develop this like excuse to continue to dwell in whiteness. But in this situation, you noticed it in a way that kind of interested me, because you said it wasn't the kids that bothered me, it was the adult woman. I was being called a white boy as an insult. And I feel like that was a point where a seed started to grow in you, where you started to wonder, like, well, why? You know what I mean? Why is this? Can you talk a little bit about that, like that process from there to kind of like really where you are now? Because I feel like that, you know, that's a place that a lot of the, you know, the racists will say, you know, one time I was just minding my business and I got my ass kicked. And it's like, okay, my boy, like, so what? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because what I took away wasn't that at all. I mean, the bullying and stuff from the white jocks was like infinitely worse than just being like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But what I realized in that moment was, for the first time, and being a skateboarder, getting kicked out of places a lot and stuff, was attuned to space, I think, and I realized that race wasn't something in our skins, but was something that coded the world around us and where we could go and how we could act and how we could move. And that was the first time that I had experienced that on the end of it, of being told you can't be here, because most of the time it was the other way of, I mean, and the difference between you being told not to go to Highlandtown and me being told not to go somewhere is the thing that, like Kwame Ture says, you know, that the white guy has the Army and the Navy standing behind him too, when you're scared, and the black man doesn't have that. And so the people who had been actively kept out of, as I later found out through sundown town laws and stuff, of places I've been all my life growing up, and this is in South Carolina, in a very segregated space, and it was the first time that I had noticed segregation. Someone hold it.
Yeah, I agree. I like that.
So from there, it was like, oh, this is this code. But of course, the way that whiteness also works is by a constant forgetting. My favorite parable for this was going to be the book from the beginning, and then we can talk about it if you want later, like why it didn't turn out this way. But Robert Smalls, the great Reconstruction politician from Beaufort, South Carolina, had been enslaved on a Confederate warship, stole the ship, took it to the Union side, commanded it for the Union, ended up desegregating Philadelphia's public transportation during the 1860s when his boat was being repaired there, and ended up owned 5 newspapers, you know, and we see how like hard it is to get something like The Beat started. And this is in like Reconstruction, South Carolina, you have 5 fucking newspapers, like just an amazing badass of a guy. 5-term U.S. congressman, buys the home that he was enslaved in, and the woman who had owned that home and thought she owned him and his mother before comes back with dementia, and he lets her stay there, and he cares for her. This is what his family told me, and every day she forgot, and she would act as if things were the way they were before. And I feel like that's a parable for the way whiteness works. So you start to realize these things, but then it's an intellectual realization. It doesn't do much for the way you move about in space. And I'm sure that so many of the white people in this room right now have had similar experiences in black neighborhoods of Baltimore, when for the first time you feel like, oh, I'm in the physical minority. This is not the feeling that is the feeling that I'm accustomed to. And then you start grasping. And that's also for why I wanted to give like young kids who feel something like that, something to grasp towards. I saw the kid in the back look, not quite your age yet, but shortly older.
Man, he might already like be heavier than you right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Just some bad influence stuff too.
You touch on a lot of really like uncomfortable moments in this book. One that is kind of throughout the book is your relationship with your father. And I think that I always feel like one of the things that make us beautiful as humans is that we can always find like similarity in our experiences. And toward the end, you call your father a coward. And I recently came to the realization that my father was a coward. Talk to me a little bit about that whole like transition, because in the beginning you're suspicious of him, but he's not showing you anything really like crazy. You know what I mean? You understand that he's dead and he's taking care of you, and he loves you, but he keeps saying these things that bother you. And at first it's kind of like typical teenage annoyance with adults, right? But then you grow up to really find out the ugliness that he's upholding. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the primary relationships in the book, and one of the primary ways I was able to understand whiteness. So I was born in '72, and that's the year that South Carolina schools were actually integrated, even though that like the first case that got rolled into Brown versus Board was Briggs versus Elliott in my dad's county, Clarendon County, South Carolina. He was one of six sons to be raised there, and it was a majority black area, and they were fairly poor because his dad actually came to the University of Maryland and ran off with a vaudeville singer who then left him, and he ended up being kind of a ne'er-do-well and married a woman much younger than his first wife, who was my grandmother. And so, but amazingly, out of five other white guys, the remaining ones, of my dad's brothers, none of them became Trumpists or anything, even though they were Democrats, but they were still racist, essentially. And but my dad, he's the only one who didn't go to college. And so he used this, well, we were poor and we were in the minority and it was all the same, even though like this is Jim Crow, South Carolina, that like someone could have been arrested or even killed for not stepping off the sidewalk for him. And so I thought a lot about how he was 18 when the Civil Rights Act passed. So for him, and as also as gender equality was making some strides, he had thought he was going to grow up in this world where he was going to compete with nobody but white men, essentially. And he found that wasn't the world that he found himself in. And I think he felt, and I think this is what Trump tapped into, and a lot of people had grief for that had to remain unnameable to him. And that's why they're like, oh, he feels so liberated to get to say our racist shit again. But I think it's more than that, because it comes from a sense of lostness that he couldn't understand. But you look at the pictures of the white families, like the Lamar riot, where white people turned over the school bus when they were first integrated, in the year I was born. So many years later, and you see the screaming faces of these white people, and like, what were you as a white person growing up around that? What did that do to your mind? And so I really, working through those issues with and right after that first skateboard scene, we're driving home, my friend and I were skating, and he ends up he would call black people bears, and he thought this was actually preferable to any of the slurs that his other family had used. And it gets tied to this assassination later on that his grandfather, my great-grandfather, committed, killing a black county commissioner named Peter Lemon in 1871. But I loved him. He died while I was writing the book. and I wrote this really theoretical version about white forgetting and about all of this stuff. And my editor, like, bless her, would not take it. She's a black woman, and she said, you know, I bought this book because I wanted to know what it feels like to be white right now. And I don't get that at all from what you gave me in this first draft. And so this remarkable confluence of things happened where my dad had ALS, so it's this gruesome, horrible death. And I was, as that was happening, I was writing this, what turned to the final version of the book as rapidly as possible, using that hurricane force of emotions to break down the liar in my mind. So with I Got a Monster, we had to learn to deal with a lot of liars. But like, I was so much more slick than Tommy Stepp or any of them people. Wayne Jenkins to myself, you know? I was slick, motherfucker. And I had to figure out how to get through all of that. And so that's why I had to just throw out all of my learning and theoretical stuff. And that emotional relationship was the one that let me in to try to figure out what it was. But yeah, we went through this really, he was a Trump supporter. On January 6th, he had just had his ALS diagnosis, and we had this huge conflict about it because that's what his grandfather, my great-grandfather, had done in 1877 after the election.
And he tried to bring up like, he's like, why ain't nobody talking about something?
The Steve Scalise, when the Republican softball team got shot.
Yeah, when they got shot, why ain't nobody talking about that?
Yeah, the day after. And that was always his rhetorical. Why is nobody talking about it? And then you're on the other thing and away from what's important, both on emotional levels and on. But you know, that's what happened with Reconstruction is the red shirts and again with the red hats and stuff. Some of the parallels are just were chilling. Stormed the state capitol, falsified, claimed they won the election when they hadn't. Stormed the state capitol, but were successful. Took it over, had an alternate government. Both governments were occupying the capitol for days until the federal troops left, and then the white supremacist party called it redemption and took over and instituted Jim Crow. And so I couldn't believe that he was minimizing that because it was exactly the thing that had allowed him to teach that great-grandfather was a hero. And so I called him a coward, and I later regretted that a lot because he had to have a lot of courage to deal with the ALS in a lot of ways, but I didn't regret that I confronted him in that way, and ultimately I decided that I had to spend my energy caring for him at his end of life, and then trying to repair the damage that our family had done in his hometown, rather than like convince him or convert him. He wasn't going to do anyone harm or good anymore, particularly at that point. And so I went and began efforts in his hometown with, but that's what it's about, is we have to deal with the people that we love. And it's not, they might feel it's about condemning them, but it's about helping them overcome all of the stuff they've inherited. And they might not have had the tools and the privileges and the things that then we've had in order to the long periods to process to get over some of that. And so it really is, became at the heart of the book. And he died right as I was finishing the very last pages of the rewrite.
What do you think he would say about the book?
The most heartbreaking thing to me was he went with me on a lot of these research trips to archives, and he was really interested in what I was finding out, and interested in, and we were at an archive. I was looking for information about this assassination that my great-grandfather committed, and found this genealogical chart that was labeled at the top, Dr. Woods plus maiden slave, and it was generations of a black family descended from a rape committed by my great-grandfather. And we had this really serious conversation about that. And I thought he was, something that was the last time he ever, it was days before the pandemic started, The last time he ever really was out of the house doing anything was that day. And then in an email to his family, one of his brothers is a sort of Democratic operative sort. And he's like, see, I'm going to tell everyone that your family were slaveholders and that these were Democrats who committed these assassinations. And he was using it again for a whatabout and an argument and to get one up on his family. So I don't know. That broke my heart when that happened. So I don't know exactly what he would think about it, but I do think he would be proud. He did value writing, and he did. He loved it. Rush Limbaugh once talked about me and called me a lunatic, and that's my dad's proudest day. And so, you know, if the right wingers start attacking me, then he'll be more proud. He would have been more proud.
Again, I think this is a very bold approach to talking about whiteness. I was just talking to some friends over a couple weekends ago, and I was like, I don't know, I don't have any white friends who are timid about this shit. You know what I'm saying? Even right now, we're sitting in a room with probably mostly like-minded people. And even though the space is full, it's still a very small number in terms of the overall, in terms of how many people are actually upholding this stuff. Even when you look at it right now with the Supreme Court and everything going on with the Republican majority, Republican majority, because the Dems aren't getting shit done. How does this book, in your mind, reach the masses? In an ideal world, in a way that, really becomes dinner table discussion that I think is extremely necessary, particularly in white families.
Yeah, that's such a good question and so hard. I mean, it's amazing that we have this crowd of people, but think even here in Baltimore in a majority black city of all the white people maybe in Rowan Park or somewhere, you're like, I'm not going to Greenmount. Right. I might see a squeegee kid or something. And then there's the tension of a book comes out and you're supposed to sell it. I want people to read it because I think it's an important conversation. But it's I thought a lot with this about how whiteness and race ends up working so much like capitalism. You can be anti-capitalist and yet you're still stuck in the capitalist system. You're anti-capitalist, but you're spending money. And you can be anti-racist, but you can't escape the economy of whiteness. And so I'm trying to embrace the promotional hustle of doing this stuff, even though it's strange in trying to do that. But because I really do think that it needs to be in Roland Park, it needs to be in South Carolina, it needs to be in especially these states where they're outlawing CRT. I'm really looking forward to being outlawed and then trying to go there and
do some talks in Florida.
Yeah, I am. That's the only little tour is going to be a southern tour, and going to try to go and so I think that's one of the ways is to get the angry white people in those places mad about it in a certain way, because one, they're not being mad at a black author at that moment, they're being mad at me instead. And so I can maybe pick a little of that ire. And then maybe their kids will hear about it because they're ranting about it. And their kids will get it on their Kindle or on their phone, and they'll read it. And then they'll end up subverting their parents and shit. And so that's not that I'm going to go on any of these right-wing things, but I do think that when those people get mad about it, it will help get the kids that are, it's super important, the people who are buying their kids the anti-racist baby and stuff, but I want to get the kids whose parents are never going to buy them anything like that at all, and make it be the book that you're passing around in the bathroom at school or whatever, because you think that your parents don't want you to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a dope example of like necessary growth and change. You know, I think a lot of times people get in a place or mentality where they kind of stay the same way. You know what I mean? Because it's comfortable to be there. But you know, you challenge and you know push forward. You know, kind of push through a lot of uncomfortable stuff. So I commend you for that.
Stop with the commending me. I appreciate it, but
Yeah, no, because I'm getting ready. Yeah. So,
okay, good. Good.
it's trying to butter you up. You're fucking up.
I asked you for a reason. Come.
Tell me about times where you have, you know, benefited from your whiteness in a way that, you know, directly hurt somebody of color.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I remembered when I really tried to start thinking about that, and I ended up writing about it in a piece in Salon this week, that, but I was drunk and driving at like 16 and crashed my car into an older black man's car. And my grandfather was this guy that was I don't even know how to describe him. He owned a carpet store in this town, but it was a carpet mill town, and so it was maybe a slightly bigger position than, and he was just a fast talker and a operator and a wheeler dealer kind of guy, and he knew everyone, and he took bets from all of the politicians and cops and stuff in his carpet store. And so he just shows up, happened to be driving by, shows up, knocks on the thing. They write up the accident, though I was in the back of the police car knowing that I was drunk. They write up the accident as that it was too fast for conditions because it was raining, and let me off the hook with it, which not only like if the insurance paid for it either way, but later on the guy said that he was hurt, and you know, it's like, oh, there's no way to sue us or anything like that because of the way it's written up according to the weather, and then they wrote it up like that intentionally. And a lot of people on the Salon article, a lot of white people, said, oh, that's just corruption, that's not, and that's true, and the same with the police corruption, that's corruption, but whiteness is corruption. It's a conspiracy for that corruption. There are other corrupt conspiracies that happen, but this happens to be the biggest one that's dominated our history. It's a conspiracy that we're going to agree that this thing, skin color, one drop, all of these sort of criteria that we defined race as in the 17th century and earlier, that's going to be this, you know, hierarchical system in America. And so there is no whiteness without white supremacy. There is no whiteness without a conspiracy. And the people who are like, hey, look, dude, your family's fucked up because you're from South Carolina. And y'all are some racist people down there. But we up here in Pennsylvania, in York, where all BBD lives, we're good. Because we were on the right side of the Civil War. Well, like, we might inherit the bad shit, we don't inherit the good shit from you still got to do it. And, you know, you're in the conspiracy, as in you know, the GDTF conspiracy or any other legal conspiracy by a conspiracy. You have to denounce it in order to, and acknowledge it in order to, for the actions of all of the conspirators to no longer adhere to you in the future. And so, you know, there's just countless instances like that in the book, but that one really struck me because it was so, it had been obvious to me at the time. And yet, at the time, and this is part of the problem with whiteness, is that when we always see ourselves as the hero of the narrative, the story's about us, and everyone else is a damsel or a helper, or especially white dudes, man. We're awful at this. I'm awful at this. I wrote a book with me as the hero. So, but when we do that, and I did that as a way to try to decenter, but when we do that, we're able to harm other people without actually seeing it as harm. In my narrative, it was, I was the outlaw escaping the law in this thing, and it was just a complete farce. Like the thing I read, there was an infinite gap between my self-conception and, my self-conception and my reality. But in the city, too, I think that there's plenty, like John alluded to at the beginning. I mean, it took a long time to realize the apartheid nature of this city, and city paper was unforgivably white for a long period when I was there. And, we tried to finally start dealing with that with like making the Fall Arts Guide be about arts apartheid in the city, but it fell far too short. And one of the things I deal with in here that was hard to write about was how during the Uprising, I got a lot of cred, and I ended up realizing, I got cred for being a white person going into black spaces and interpreting that for other white people. And, that is not the dynamic that needs to be working to interpret those. I believe that I needed and that we do need to report and that there was some good that I could do, because there was things that police might not do when a white person was there in the middle of the night or whatever. Nevertheless, there was this real sense that it was part of a fucked up economy that I was profiting from. And then I started working for The Guardian after that. And that was because of that fucked up economy. And it, and that harmed other people that could have been doing those same things. And so the examples are countless, but they are definitely right here in the city as much as they're, just down south.
Yeah. I don't really see you as a hero in this book.
Good.
I think I see you more as like a gravedigger. You know what I mean? It's an unfortunate job. You know what I mean? But it's necessary.
Fucking hey, man.
You know what I'm saying?
Put that on my thing now.
Yeah. But gravediggers make good money. And
so whiteness is like the horror movie.
This motherfucker is $29. So, you gonna make some money. But I think that a lot of times we, I know for me being black, I find sometimes in spaces that white people can kind of get off on talking about this stuff. You know what I mean? It's almost like, the conversation happens, but then there's no real action that comes with it. I know a lot of really smart, liberal white people who love to get online and, but then in real life, you are not doing shit. How do you separate yourself from that lane?
Yeah, with difficulty is the short answer, because it's always easier for all of us to do nothing. It's hard to do anything, and it's easier if you're a writer to write. Like, oh yes, I've done the things, I've done what I need to do, but that's not enough. And it, I had this moment also in as a reporter, I've been very I don't give money to anywhere because you don't want to be your integrity, your credentials, your all of these things that are supposed to validate what reporters are doing. And I just had this moment, this crushing moment during the Uprising about how flawed and faulty all of that was when I'm sitting there and I had COVID at the time, but I knew how bad it was, and it was tearing through jails and through youths in jails. And as a criminal justice reporter, I had watched thousands probably of black men be marched into the Baltimore City Reception Court in chains, shackled together, day after day, told, oh no, the lawyer's going on vacation, we can't do court that day. Oh, the judge vacation that day, prosecutor vacation that day. You have another thing in 6 months, go back to jail. And I was then doing all this deep research on my family doing that same thing 200 years ago, 150 years ago, in very similar ways. And I'm like, how is maintaining this bullshit, false journalistic thing of when I could give my government stimulus at this moment to Ball, to pay for it, it's terrible in incarceration and stuff, but to pay to get black youths out of jail while they're waiting for trial. And it's like, fuck it, if I can never write about Balt again, then fuck it, I can never write about Balt again. Like, who cares? This is, but it's, I do this thing and in the book where I cross my name out because I realized that every story I'd written, regardless of what I was trying to do, was a Confederate monument standing above the story because of who the Baynard family was that I was named after and who the Woods family were. And like, it became this horrible, and that was my dad's name too, so it's part of it, although he went by John, but that would be an empty gesture, that crossing out. I felt like I couldn't change it because then it would continue the cover-up that's really constituted the whiteness that I inherited. The cover-up of all my family's crimes, that they were good, that they were noble, that, you could be a kindly slaveholder. All of this insane stuff that is just would be completely impossible in any other context. And so I couldn't change it, and I couldn't let it stay there. So using the stuff from philosophy and deconstruction and stuff, crossing it out, but letting it stay there, seemed to be one strategy. But like that ended up immediately proving problematic because it caused problems for my publishing people, like the low-level people. How do we do that on a thing? And so I'm just this white dude looking cool and giving people more work. And that was not the way to go about doing it. And so we were going to abandon it. Then they chose to bring it back, which I was grateful for because I do think it's important. But the other thing that since the book was over, I've been working, at the end of the book I go, there's an activist in Clarendon County, South Carolina, just an amazing guy named George Frierson. He's a historian, a preacher, Vietnam vet. And George Stinney was the youngest person ever executed in the U.S. Legally at 14 years old after a 2-hour trial in Clarendon County. And George Frierson, who's black, several years ago in 2014, he had got the state to overturn the conviction, to overturn the execution, and got them to memorialize Stinney. He's not gotten them to apologize yet, which was the final plank of his goal. But I was so lucky that I was sharing my research with the Clarendon County Archives, and they said one day, hey, this guy George Frierson wants to talk to you. He's also interested in Peter Lemon, who was born into slavery in South Carolina, left and went in and fought in the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry in the Civil War, came back, ran a black militia, was elected county commissioner in the election of 1868, which was just wildly violent on the part of the white people. They formed the militias to protect candidates as well as, they executed a state senator. Ben Tillman, who was elected later to the U.S. Senate, executed a state senator, and they said, oh, what's your last wish? And he said, let me pray. And he was praying, and they said, that's too long, and they just shot him in the head. Bragged about it later in the U.S. Senate. And so Frierson was really an adept at this area of Reconstruction, Clarendon County, South Carolina, and at what it means to make amends to the past, to try to take the past seriously and its crimes and what we do about them. And so we immediately became, the two citizens of 1871, Clarendon County, who were still alive. Jess Douglas also helped me find an archivist here who, I'm not sure she's here now, but just found the crucial coroner's report that made that come to be. So much love to Jess, but we've been not only crossing out my name, sorry for the long answer, but it's important to put Peter Lemon's name back on the record. So last month, Frierson and I went to the Clarendon County Council and we presented to them all of our findings about Lemon. We advised them to name their county commission building after him, to give reparations to the Lemon family. And then I'm working with the church where he was born to buy a gravestone. Where he's buried. We know where he was, but there's no stone. To buy a gravestone from him on behalf of my family. And so, that's again small, but it's a way to, there's this giant Confederate monument in front of the courthouse there still, and it's a way to start the conversation about blowing that up, and also just putting the Lemon's name back in the historical record, which has been erased entirely by the cover-up.
Yeah.
One or two more?
Yeah. This last one, then we'll open it up. Yeah, cool. Hey, sit down, John. I got this. It's white people. I'm just trying to. Sit down, John. We got this, bro. They everywhere, in every space. 1 minute. I got this. I'm a professional. No, I wanted to say, when you start uncovering a lot of the stuff that happens, it made me really think about my own family. I have an aunt, great aunt, Questy Lee Quince. My mother's side is originally from Delray Beach, Florida. And Questy Lee Quince was a business owner. She's the first business owner, and the first black woman business owner in Delray Beach, Florida. And she was murdered and the Klan hired a black couple who was in debt to murder her. And there's nothing about her, I can't find anything. And then years later, her body, her gravesite was covered with they put another person on top of her gravesite, so my family couldn't even find her gravesite. And so as I'm reading this book, I start to think about how many of these stories exist in our country. For decades, we don't find out anything. How many of us in this room have relatives who either were Klansmen or victims of the Klan, that we'll never know about. We'll never be able to uncover that, because we don't have the resources or the time to do the research, or, a friend like Jess Douglas to find a coroner's report and all of these things. So, it's not really a question. I wanted to kind of point out that, because when you bring all of these things up, every time it comes up and I'm reading it, it's triggering. Because it's holy fuck, nobody, I never knew that. How many other people don't know that? How important is it for you, as you're writing this book, how important is it for you to really highlight those things? And why?
I think it's so important right now, with what's happening in the country, with 6 justices seemingly devoted to originalism, which is effectively white supremacist patriarchy. That's what the decision of overturning Roe, that's what the gun decision was. So when they say, you have to look back to if there's some precedent before. In the deep tradition and culture of this country. Well, in South Carolina, in the so-called slave codes of 1740, not only was it illegal for Africans to carry weapons, it was mandatory for white men to. Is that part of the deep tradition of the country that we're trying to elevate and promote in the highest court in an interpretation of the law? You can't just take away the 13th Amendment came, and so we still revere these founders who the rest of their thoughts were formed by growing up in the middle of a totalitarian society. That's one of the reasons that it's so important. the thing I realized in deeply studying, especially South Carolina history, and it's the worst of the worst, but the rest of the country is like deeply, nearly as bad. But the vast majority of the population was black. A very small minority was white. And it was just this incredibly totalitarian system, and we don't use that word. And but that's exactly what it is: a small minority exerting absolute control and extracting absolute wealth, absolute value from the vast majority, and that we even consider any of that worth and the thinking process behind that worth holding up and trying to deal with the problems that we're facing now, I think makes it so urgent. And then even more like, whiteness just fuels all the problems that we're facing increasingly. And so you think back even to like the 30s, where you have these vigilante mobs on borders of California, driving away even white people from, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Georgia, and much worse to people of color. And as resources get more scarce with climate change and stuff, the white nationalists and fascists, they're just getting worse and worse and worse and more powerful. And so I think that we really are at the moment where if we don't start dealing with this, we're just fucked.
Yeah, I 100% agree. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions before John Dita does not ever have me back. Everybody, I'm yeah, you want to open it up for questions? Anybody got questions they want to ask?
Right here. So thanks for a wonderful conversation, and thank you for writing this book. Strikes me, I've got a massive problem with the whiteness literature in general. I always think of white racial identities as political construction, and the way the whiteness literature seems to focus on therapy and psychology seems problematic to me. So when it seems as if for you, the book kind of operated as a form of therapy, and that you took kind of a therapeutic approach with your dad before he passed, but your final solution, the thing that helped you kind of wrestle with your own history, was a political project. So to the extent you would have to juxtapose, like if you only had to choose one, writing a book about whiteness as kind of a therapeutic project versus writing a book about whiteness and identity as a political project, which would you choose?
Oh, entirely political. The therapeutic wasn't, the purpose wasn't therapeutic in any way whatsoever. The therapeutic was the tool to override my rationalizing racist bullshit going on in my own head. So I didn't mean that I was getting, it did actually help me deal with my dad dying, but that's just because I'm a writer and that's how I deal with everything, I think. If I'm not writing something, what do I do? But what the death and stuff helped me do was override my lies to myself.
But that's when you talk about
that's political.
But when you say it like that, and I just read the end of the book. I just bought it. It's dope. Buy it. The end of the book is dope as hell, even though I haven't read the rest of it. But what you just said was it helped you work out in your own head. That's when I hear that, I hear therapy.
Yeah, to the extent that writing is the only way I figure out anything about myself, the way you can see yourself as another. If that's therapeutic, then that's therapeutic. But I think it's more to see oneself as other is more political than therapeutic, maybe, or at least the purpose is therapeutic, and the purpose is political, and the therapeutic is a nice side benefit. And I don't know that I'm therapized by it at all. I'm not sure that it was effective in that regard.
So I want to ask, I'll try to give a little background. So I am originally from Latin America. I've lived in several states, Arkansas, upstate New York, and Florida, Maryland. My husband is from Massachusetts. And so I have experienced just attitudes towards me as a Latin American woman that I hadn't experienced before I came to this country, so I've had to deal with that I've lived in this country since 2003. And so, but a lot of times people, and I've been most of my life actually in the East Coast side, and people, they don't think of themselves as racist, or they don't think, or if they're democratic leaning or politically, then they feel like they're doing better. But from my perspective, I receive the same treatment. It doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat. If they have this white supremacy attitude, they treat me the same. And here in Baltimore, there's a lot of sense because it's a majority African American place, and there's a lot of Latinos, but people are always, when I bring up some issues of Latin America, people are like, well, this is just a black and white issue. And so they think that they're more anti-racist because they are defending the plight of black people, while at the same time treating another person of color in the same way. So what do you think that, how can people really deal with their whiteness when they think of themselves as like champions of others, or like, I'm Democrat, so therefore I'm not as racist. But how can they really deal with this and disconnect from some of these feelings that they're better off already?
Thanks, Cecilia. That's such a good question. I mean, that is one of the most dangerous things with whiteness right now. So, like, what we see from emancipation through the end of Reconstruction, through, like, whiteness reformulates according to political expediencies for it to maintain its power. And so right now, one of the ways, the best and most effective ways to maintain power as a white person is not, I guess we just had openly racist presidents and a less openly racist president now. But for the most part, by acting like you're not racist is one of the most powerful ways to maintain racist power in America right now. All the corporations putting up their we support Black lives, and then doing all the things like the police dancing and whatever. And so, I don't know, that's one of the hard things. Like, how do you, and that was what, like myself, overcoming the lies in my own mind was like the thing. And how do you get someone to stop lying to themselves and to bridge the gulf between their self-conception and what they actually are in objective terms in the world? All the Roland Park houses with the Black Lives Matter signs benefiting off of racial covenants and all of these things in that neighborhood. And I don't know, that might be where Lester's right, that there was a little, like, writing the book was how I tried to get through some of my own lies like that. And I do think that especially when it becomes, like for me, race growing up was just black and white. Like in South Carolina, that was, all of my skateboard heroes were named Mark Gonzalez, Tony Guerrero, and I just thought, white guys. I just had no idea, even. And then I moved to New Mexico, and I was racist in all kinds of new ways that I wasn't aware of at all. And I thought that, and then there, the very few black people that I met, like, oh, you're from the South, so you understand black people, so you're cool. And it's like, wow, that really shows that there are very few black people here that you want to talk to a person from the South. And so it's so complicated and hard because I think that's the problem with the whole Democratic Party, or the vast majority of it, is that they still support racist policies, they still support racist ideas and ideology. They're not fascist like the Republicans is the only thing they have going for them, but the bad part is that they think they don't need to improve anymore, that they're down. And that's what the book's trying to do, is be like, you can't just pretend you're down or we're never gonna get any better. You have to deal with all of your problems that are going on with you. And we have to, as white people in community together, do that so that the younger people can see, so that we can deal with it, but we're not perfect. Just like every man in this room is sexist in a wide variety of ways, because those ideas are created as a hierarchy, when race is created as a hierarchy. If we are benefiting from that hierarchy, we're both allowed to benefit from it and tell ourselves that we hate it. That's maybe the most dangerous thing.
I think we gotta stop celebrating the performance too, right? You know what I mean? When you talk about putting the Black Lives Matter sign up, or in the book at one point you talk about Nancy Pelosi and everybody wearing the kente cloth. You know what I mean? I remember when they did that Black Twitter, we roasted the fuck out of them. You know what I mean? Because it's like, what are you doing? There's almost this kind of out of touch performance thing where it's like, oh well, I will hire a black person, or I will hire a Latino person, and but they're not really digging in and doing the work.
But those are easy to see in the corporations or whatever, because you're like, oh, look at them. But in myself, so the time I mentioned when we found that genealogical chart, it's me, my 76-year-old white Trumpist dad, and a 30-something-year-old black archivist from there. And we come across this together, and so my mind's kind of bouncing between them. And I saw on the shelves right above it there, this book by Peter Wood called Black Majority, about early South Carolina. It's amazing. That you should read. And I found myself so desperately wanting to talk about it with the archivist. And then I realized that's because I wanted to show that I was cool. Yeah. It was my fucking Black Lives Matter flag that I was putting in my yard there to show that that might be my dad, but that ain't me. And it was more sophisticated. It wasn't necessarily better. It is better to read books and know more shit, of course, but
playing off the back of what Eze was just talking about as far as the celebrating the performance of it, I want to know what in your mind you do to sort of translate into real life action beyond this, because some would say this is a performance in itself. It's white man writes book about white people kind of fucked up. You get an advance from a publisher, charge $30 for it, and we have this talk, and it's this is cool, but this is very in what ways does this work not be self-serving and sort of a further perpetuation of the come on dad, that's racist, white dude, that we all sort of that many of us probably in here are. So can you speak more to how that translates outside of to actual things outside of a self-serving medium like this?
Definitely, and it's something that I'm trying to. That was sort of when I was talking about the thing of selling a book and whatever. I'm struggling with that, so I'm gonna answer it from the position that I'm in. But it was, as I was going through this, it was really important to, most of my work that I do has been as a journalist here in Baltimore, and I've now shifted towards engaging in action because I'm not reporting on the city right now. But also engaging in Clarendon County. Like, I feel like this is a thing that I had to do, even though I'd never lived there, I'd never been from there, but my dad was from there, and then my family, when I discovered this guy Peter Lemon, who had been killed by my family, had been erased, and then all of the other horrible things, I've been trying to figure out ways to work at the direction of Frierson, because I don't want to come in there and say this is what we need to do. So he and the archivist are giving the lead as we're creating the campaign to memorialize Lemon, to create a Peter Lemon fund in some way that will help return, and that I'm then trying, because my job in that, their job is to decide what's needed there. My job is then to go to the white people and say, to my white family or whatever, and say, we need money for this. You need to give for this. We need to start by giving this tombstone. We need to work. We need to, and so like, I mean, the example, and I'm not anywhere near there, but is the Hoff Center family that did the beat, you know, and Adam says, so he convinced his family to give all of their money to create, to fund a black paper. And then but when I talked to him about it, he says, it's not worth anything if you don't get the other white people to do it. Like, it's only the one paper. But like, every white person in this room is only 5 steps away from someone who could touch $1 million. And like, that's what we need to do, is go, and that's much less, that's much less cool than doing a lot of other, holding a sign up and, as they said with the road thing, making a viral sign or whatever, but it's because it's doing the same boring shit of talking to white people, the same white people stuff, but that's the thing we're good at, is getting money towards things. And so I'm really, what I would like to see this book do is get starting in Clarendon because of the historical thing, to get white people both there and outside of there who are connected to it, to start funding some way for reparations in that community, to start advocating for memorializing Eze mentioned his family that's not known, but like the thousands, his family member, but the thousands of people. I came across one newspaper article that was like, a slave, Joe, was killed horse racing with a child at the Woods camp or whatever, and it's like, it's just so horrendous, and horse racing, and there's of course no investigation, there was no law involved, and so there really needs to be not only an effort to tear down monuments, to memorialize the people who have been killed, but I think there at least the effort is going to go towards returning plantations, which is a huge amount of all of the land there, to black ownership. So the thing we'd like to do, land trusts are doing that around the South, is figure out ways to get money to return the land to the black residents that it was stolen from there. And then, it's ongoing. I don't know all of there's so much that, the one thing I'm sure of is that I'm wrong right now about this, and that everything I'm trying, I hope I will think I was wrong in a year. But I'm trying to marshal resources from white people into a really marginalized rural black community that my family calls Great Harm in now. I hope that starts to answer, but I feel like it's, every answer to that question is just super inadequate from every white person, and so I don't want to say that like the things I'm doing are great or anything. Like, this is, the book is an inscribement of mistakes, and I know I'm going to keep making them, but I'm trying to work, and especially by working with other white people, to try to bring things there, but I'm hoping we can do something.
Thanks for being here. I grew up in the deep south. I knew what his son downtown was, so that's how I was 10. And my father, who's also my main abuser, died 11 years ago. When you said that your father was a coward, I actually yelled out loud back here and said, me too, mine too. And what I want to ask you is, how do you define cowardice?
How do I define cowardice? The most fundamental definition, I think, is running away from reality. And I think that has been especially the Southern white tradition, but the white tradition. It's fitting that the tagline in Dixie or whatever is "look away," because that's a command. Not it's an exhortation, and that's what we've done. We the generation after emancipation of white people argued that, well, especially in the South, that, well, it was better, and very quickly the people who fought for the North came around to that. After Reconstruction fell for political reconciliation purposes by the Spanish-American War, it was this really, we're reuniting war against brothers, looking away. Whiteness really is a form of dementia, where we keep forgetting all the time what it was that we thought we learned about it yesterday, and that's cowardice. It's something that's become so habitual we can't control it. Like running at first sight of something, but it is to look away from reality is cowardice, and people find it hard enough, which I find surprising sometimes, to do that about their ancestors or whatever. But where it's really hard is to do that about ourselves. I think about the last question. And all of the times that I couched myself as a reporter here, and how important it was, and people like Shorty, you were here, and people who have done so much work. White people have done so much work with Megan, and I'm standing there and writing it on the side, that's cowardice too. That I'm just I'm going to keep this distance and share it and there is value in that. But I've now crossed the line where the value in that is, it's a false value, because there's always going to be a bad faith argument that you're biased anyway, and that you're not, and objectivity is bullshit anyway. And so objectivity means whiteness in the same way that originalism means whiteness. And so I feel so much of my own, it's easy to cast the blame on all the other people, my dad and whatever, but a lot of my own life's very recent life has been full of cowardice. Even as I'm running towards danger, it's actually the more cowardly thing to do sometimes in the way that I do.
Do we have time for one more question?
Somebody else.
Oh, Lisa, last question.
That's Lisa.
Hi.
Thank you for this. This is really fascinating, and I appreciate the conversation about just sort of the white supremacist project and how tricky it can be. Sort of on a spiritual and emotional level, on a physical level, on a metaphysical level, right? And one of the ways that I think about that project is so interesting is how quickly it can metamorphose in the interest of power and invite more people in. And so there are many white folks, even in my own family, who have been invited into whiteness after 1860, who do not have the same kind of sort of egregious histories your family that include sort of murder and rape of Black people. And so I'm curious about whether and how you have an intention of translating this story for folks whose white ancestors have been invited into whiteness more recently or don't have that quite as egregious a story, but who are still so much beneficiaries of this system.
Yeah, definitely, and I think you might appreciate the argument that I try to weave through there, because it's based on like legal stuff and legal definitions of conspiracy. And once we start to see whiteness as a conspiracy in a legal sense, then it doesn't matter if you came in later to it, you're in the conspiracy. And and so that's where the people are like, oh, well, I didn't know. And he says, well, yeah, and you're right that none of us, people who say that, none of us did, but like we're all part of the conspiracy that was begun then. So it's like being part of the mob in the days where it's like, well, we have not murdered anyone in this way in a long time. Well, it's still the way, you're still part of a murderous criminal conspiracy. And it's weird to call it a criminal conspiracy given the fact that it's the foundation and the basis of our law. But in any other sense, it really would be a criminal conspiracy that we have agreed upon the enterprise, white people, and that can be widely expanded so that we see even people like Clarence Thomas, who are Black, acting in as the most staunch originalist in the court in some ways, acting in great deference to white supremacy, and Enrique Torres, the leader of the Proud Boys, being Latino, and so we do see that whiteness invites people, because that's the thing, it's not an essentialist thing, it's a made-up lie that's a conspiracy. And we just chose to value it as hierarchy. And so as long as you're valuing that and benefiting from that value as the hierarchical value, then you're part of the conspiracy, regardless of what your family did in the past. I do find it odd to myself that I'm interested in, the reason that George Frierson was so meaningful to me is I wondered, why does it matter that I'm worried about the past rather than right now in Baltimore, which I was also worrying about. But I felt I just couldn't shake it. So that might be a self-indulgent part of it, but I in finding others there who found value in it in that area, I hope it wasn't, but I felt that, the Greeks had this idea of miasma that was an inherited curse, motivated so many of the ancient tragedies, but it was also what the slaveholders in South Carolina called the mist that rose up off the marsh that they thought caused malaria. And so that was one of the things that I inherited this curse that has to be expiated, and it has to be expiated now, not then. All we can do is what's now, but also to separate out what the grounds of the conspiracy are, since we have 6 Supreme Court justices who are basing decisions about all our lives on what fucking people back then thought. It seems like it is worth untangling that.
All right, yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me do this. I
asked you to do this especially because we used to sit by each other at Real News with Darna at the same table with us, but we would have conversations like this all the time. And he's one of the people who wouldn't let me get away with shit in a newsroom, and so I really appreciate you bringing that spirit here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like Charlottesville, and I remember we came down the day after. You and Brandon were there, but while you were there, you were like giving like some of the realest updates of what was going on. You were giving them directly to us. You know what I mean? Like I remember talking to you one day on the phone, and you're like, "Easy, it's really bad." And I think we saw on TV how bad it was, but like you were really talking about it like from standing right there in it. And I think this book is just kind of a continuation of doing that. So, thank you again. You know what I mean? Anytime you need, I'm here.
Thanks, and that's what we need to do, y'all. By the way, the white people in here is like, you can get in the way of white harm. Like, that's what the anti-fascists did in Charlottesville. That's what find the ways that you can get in the way of white harm. For a long time, like, all the white writers and reporters and stuff, like, we're reporting on black people, and we're gonna go and like, it was trying to correct something, but like, we can get in the way of the ones causing the harm, and actually maybe not have the people who are most harmed by it be bothered with it at all. Not even know that it's happening if we cut it off at the root. And that's the thing that we kind of need to do, is get our people, because we're about to destroy the fucking world, y'all. If we can't even recognize people of color and women as people, how are they going to recognize the thousands and thousands and thousands of species going extinct? How are they going to recognize anything else that's happening in the world? It's a form of not seeing the world, of cowardice, of looking away. And man, thank y'all so much for coming. I love y'all so much.
Thank you. The book is for sale in the back. Stick around, have a drink, get your book signed, and see you again soon.
I'm going to step out and have a vape, and then I'll be ready to sign the book. What's that? My dad.
I heard that from my South Carolina family growing up too.
Yeah, he got it from his dad.
Yeah, the white folks would call us bears.
Yeah.
I heard that from my South Carolina.
You know everybody.